All right, pricing in the news. So we are looking at business headlines, talking about trends, learnings, predictions, key takeaways based on current events. So this week we are focusing on SaaS. We've got like this major trend for years now, but this company's moving into subscription models and everything as a service. And then you've got like enter ChatGPT, which is an accelerator for everybody, we notice. So anyway, there's a lot to discuss with subscriptions and SaaS. And first up, Disney. So I'm just see how quickly I can lay out like just everything that's going on with them right now. But first, we've got a price increase. So they announced this fall they're rolling out new prices for ESPN, Hulu, and Disney Plus. As part of that announcement, they're releasing a new bundle offering. So that's nice. They have like this chart that they released that has like all the different options because they've got ads, no ads, bundling of the different things. But the new thing is ad-free Disney Plus and Hulu. So anyway, that's the first thing. Next is Disney owns most of Hulu, but Comcast owns a third of it. So Comcast is looking to potentially sell that third to Disney. They moved the deal up to September. So the valuation I saw from a while ago was reported like almost 30 billion. So this is at least a $9 billion deal. So we've got that. Then Disney's also being sued by shareholders. So investors claimed that Disney's management tried to conceal staggering costs that it incurred while attempting to boost subscriber count and promise profits by the end of 2024. So there's that. And then the last two things, the writer's strike, which is like I think the big streamers are playing a big role in it. It's been going on since May, but it's costing these companies hundreds of millions of dollars in revenue. And then a big part of the strike for these companies is their use of AI to write scripts, and then also the residuals being paid for streaming. Last but not least, Disney and Charter Spectrum are in a dispute, which had Charter pull some live sports, some of their channels, which includes, unfortunately for Jeet, the US Open, and not being able to watch it. So it was, I saw a screenshot of a TV that was like, we offered Disney a fair deal. They are demanding an excessive increase. And so like most recently, this US Open thing, Disney was like, oh, just go sign up for Hulu Plus Live and you can watch it there. So that there's just a lot going on with Disney. We've got the price increase, public scrutiny, negotiations, loud opinions on social media. Potentially a starting place is you've got like this big player making moves that impact a lot of smaller players. I saw this analyst, this Wells Fargo analyst that said, we see, this is with the Charter thing, we see this as a far bigger deal for media. We estimate 5% of Charter's EBITDA is video, while plenty of media stocks get nearly 100% of EBITDA from linear network and stations. So anyway, there's a lot here. What are your thoughts?
It's like a bomb thrown.
I know.
Middle.
Choose your ending.
Yeah.
Jeet's going back to cable bundles.
I think I am. That's probably a good starting point, Pete. I guess I'm old enough to remember the cable boxes and what we used to pay. And I think there's a little bit of cross-brand price sensitivity that happens with these price increases. And I don't know how much these companies are taking that into account. Because if I look at my YouTube TV pricing, then I look at all my other niche competitive username and passwords I have, like HBO and others. The dollar figure is really staggering. It's a few $100 a month. And I'm getting to a point where I'm like, is it really worth it? Because given our travel, given all this stuff we do, like I don't really watch that much content on a regular basis. So if I don't watch it, I'm like, I don't know. Maybe I should divest out of these things and just kind of go back to something simpler times like bunny rabbit years, on TVs, and go from there, switching dials, the old school way. Because I think as a consumer, just speaking personally, I think my price sensitivity is reaching a point where I have to really seriously consider, whether it's worth it to add up all these things. So I really don't care about Disney raising their price or Hulu or anybody else, because I'm looking at it together as one price for my content or entertainment. And I'm wondering if it's worth it given how much time I spent using these services.
It's interesting just to that point. So if you think of, I heard a stat recently that, the average cable bundle that people previously purchased, and some still do, is in the $120 to $150 range a month. And like, cable has commercials, right? So the equivalent product is actually the low tier for all of these streaming services. And that's typically around, the $6.99 plus or minus per month. So it's like a 10 to 15x number of streaming services in theory you would have to buy to make it the equivalent of your prior bundle, which still feels like a great deal. But I think the difference is that when you pay for streaming, nobody wants the commercial. It's like, that's kind of the differentiator. And so the real comparison now is getting into like the $15, $17 a month, $18 a month, 20. And so pretty quick that can exceed the cable bundle. And like you said, there's always the local programming or sports. So YouTube TV at $60 a month, all of a sudden you're kind of talking the same exact thing for maybe even less convenience, because then you have to navigate to all the different apps. Like, oh, what show was I watching on which? And you're like, I don't even remember.
Yeah.
It's interesting because they'll have this lag too of the new content, since these big networks can't create the new content because of the strike, right? So like they're loading up, especially like Netflix and some of these other guys, on reality shows, which is fine for some, but like a lot of their differentiator, I thought, was moving towards this like new content that they own and shows that a lot of these big guys were creating, and now all of that is coming to a stop, and that'll take a while to run back up whenever it does.
I just find this entire space fascinating. I mean, I think all these moves that Disney's making point to the fact that this space is emerging and new, despite the fact that streaming has been around for, what seems like a decade plus. But it feels like the challenge is, how best do we go about to most effectively monetize these types of solutions? So it seems like Disney's experimenting with a lot of things. They've got the equity stake in Hulu. They've made a number of different acquisitions. So they have all this content. So then the question is, how do we make the most money off of it? And I read an article recently about Amazon, who, feels like this player that is able to get into these spaces. And one of the most kind of thought-provoking pieces on that was the amount of money that Amazon had spent on streaming, meaning like the shows itself. It was like $12 billion. It was just a crazy amount of money. And that was very similar to what Netflix, who is, the major player, had spent. But the difference was that the number of Emmy nominations that Amazon had received was like less than half of what Netflix had. So then the question becomes, they're spending this staggering amount of money on video trying to monetize this, but they're seemingly not getting the return. But then you start to pick apart what Amazon is actually doing, and they're building this kind of empire around streaming. So with this show Citadel, for example, they spent a crazy amount of money, and they promoted it. Anybody who's got a Fire Stick has seen it pretty often. And it's not necessarily the quality of the content that they're bringing in, but it's the number of people that are going in and, say, buying a Fire Stick or buying their Fire TV that is very cheap. So they can start to build out their ecosystem, because it plays so well into this broader ecosystem that they have, meaning that they have data on all of us, so they can offer the most personalized ads and they can monetize that. And then in addition to that, anytime that you open up like a third-party app via Amazon, they're getting a cut of that revenue, like those apps like Freevee or any advertising revenue they have. So they have now said, we're going to make it as easy and cheap as possible for people to enter our ecosystem. And then we're going to use the scale that we have so we can monetize it in all of these different ways. So getting back to your original point, it seems like Disney and others are experimenting with the best ways to monetize this, but Amazon is just so good at taking these things and monetizing them because they have this ecosystem built up. And I found that super fascinating with, the play that they made coming in after a lot of these other kind of incumbents in that streaming space were there.
I think it's a
Takes us back to Tesla, fleet mentality.
yeah,
That's true.
yeah. I think you almost have to put Amazon on the sideline in this conversation because they really, I mean, their valuation and their monetization strategy is completely different. You know, they are really going after as many consumers as possible and attacking them. Basically, attacking is probably a bad use of the word, but you know, getting as much information in their habits of the consumers as possible because they have a different monetization strategy in the back, like you just said, Adnan. But I think the other ones like Netflix and others, I think they're struggling between, are they content creators or are they content deliverers? And I think the space is a little bit of a wild, wild west. And because it's a bit of a wild, wild west, they don't know what they want to be when they grow up because they don't know, because traditionally, like we always say, the closer you are to the end consumer, the more power you have, the more ability you have to extract the value through pricing or whatever it might be. It's an adage that actually works in most industries. In this one particularly, I don't know if it does or not. And that's something that needs to get shaken out a little bit, whether the value capture is in the content piece or is it in the delivery and the mechanism for delivery along with marketing and things like that. I think people are still trying to figure that piece out. But as they operate individually to figure this out, I think what's going to happen is the end customer, like myself, will go, this is too much. I can't handle it. I'm going to start cutting. As soon as that happens, I think there's going to be a shakeout. And I think you're going to end up with almost like a cable model where you'll have your choice as a consumer, a few or a handful of delivery mechanisms that you can choose from, and others will be pure content providers in the back end, and they'll focus themselves on that piece of it rather than the delivery itself.
Go back to what we had before, except the difference is you can stream it on your iPad rather than fidget with all the different devices and such.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Next one. This is more like a little guy coming in hot onto the AI scene. So the headline is message to OpenAI. Sam Altman was an AI startup founder's last ditch effort to help save her company, and it worked. So this woman created this app a couple years ago. They got early stage funding and then everything kind of fell apart. But the company is called Milo. It uses a mix of now GPT-4 and human intervention to track family schedules. So it's like for parents, if you have stuff with your kids, whether it's like grocery lists or other what they're calling mundane items, you could send screenshots or emails to this app, and then it like looks through for things to do. So it could send parents reminders, like found buried in an email, the pajama day is May 18th. And then you get a reminder that you got to send the kids to school in the pajamas. So it collects all these tasks and then manages the parents and the kids. And in this case, and then she wrote to the CEO of OpenAI, and he got her a CTO and cash, and then also obviously access to OpenAI's models. And now they're in a different space. So it's like a cute, feel good disruptor story because it's not really disrupting that much except for human time and a lot of manual tasks and what they're calling mundanities. But I think it's an interesting example because we've got like somebody that kind of comes in, and ChatGPT was like this in its own way, right? Of like, a disruptor coming in and then kind of makes you think like, what are the signs or how do you assess things like that? And then not overcorrect based on what you anticipate. So where do you want to start with this one?
Such a cool story. It's like a feel-good type of environment where you see this company, and like you said, what's interesting about this is they're not turning another company upside down. They're coming in and creating a new market, which, looking back to disruptive theory, that's a very reasonable way to come in. It's either you're starting at a low end of a market or you're creating a new market. And as a parent, and particularly in that time where kids are getting back to school, you see a lot of value in something like this, right? You get like 40 different emails about things like pajama day. Yesterday we had to send the vegetables to school, this and that. So this is kind of something to help you track it that makes my life easier right off the bat. So I love the fact that she's exploring this new business model to create, in essence, a new market. So then that kind of harkens back to, in the world that we live in, particularly on the B2B side, how do you assess and look at companies like this in a way where you're not underreacting? Because you certainly don't want to do that when if you're in an existing market, but at the same time, you certainly don't want to overreact. So the question becomes, how much staying power does a solution like this have? To what extent are they impacting my customers today? And how could that change in the future? And in my eyes, what a lot of that boils down to, particularly a disruptor that's entering an existing space, is how much staying power does the solution have, one, but then also where really does their advantage come from? Do they have something, do they have a business model innovation that is perhaps giving them a cost advantage, or even a technological innovation that is giving them a cost advantage? So I find this story fascinating, and then just tying it back to some of what we see on a regular basis with our clients, how they are monitoring their business, how they're reacting to disruptors, all very relevant in a cool little story.
Well, takeaway for me on this one. So I think it was, 4 years ago, she had that introduction via Sam Altman. So if you think about where ChatGPT is then versus now it's almost like that technology that she was able to leverage or build. You could almost buy the API from ChatGPT through the token model and almost design your own copycat of that exact system. And so it's almost like the use case. You could not just how you could replicate it, but it's almost just find, this is the identified use case of, okay, you could use an AI model to automate the reminders for what you need to do for your kid's school. And that's like an oversimplification of her business. But it's kind of interesting now, it's in a place where you could apply that model to many other use cases. And it's more like, what's the creativity limit on what you can do and find the next thing to solve?
I think this is interesting, and I don't know if this is like a small event. I actually think it's fairly large, because the market for personal optimization has always kind of been there. And people have talked about personal optimization using technologies that are out there for personal reasons. Because, I mean, if you can break into the consumer market, that's like the largest market you can break into, right? You're talking billions of people. So, even though she's a startup, the potential for the market, even if you just look at parents with children under the age of 10, it's a very large market that's out there globally. So from a money perspective, it's huge. And also, this is really not a technology play, in my opinion. Going back to Adnan, what you brought up with Amazon, I think it's a human behavior play. It's human data. It's what are we doing? When are we doing? Where are we taking the kids? What's the schedule like for the human? Like, all of those things are extremely valuable for somebody like Amazon. So Amazon has things like, oh, you can track pricing on a product as a consumer on Amazon.com. You can put in a price and say, if this SKU ever hits that price, give me a push notification. All of those are human behaviors, right? And this is just one aspect of human behavior, being a parent in what we do and how we do it. So if she can break into this market, I think it's huge. It's enormous. Now, the issue that I have with it is what Pete brought up, which I think is accurate, where it's like, where's the differentiation? Where is she differentiating where, you're not going to have a tech play that comes in and supplants you right away. So my guess is she's probably trying to grow as quickly as possible to get as many people on board as possible, and then figure out other ways to monetize the value of that data or information to be more attractive to a company like Amazon, where the Amazon goes, you know what, it's not worth us building something. I'd rather go buy it and just, start using it and utilizing it for that ecosystem that I'm trying to build out. So, it's a very interesting concept to me. I think the monetization strategy is a little bit more different than others, because there is a top end that's here that's fairly large.
Interesting comment. That's the point about, it's not necessarily a tech play, it's a human behavior play. You think about this relative to management theory, some of the stuff that Clayton Christensen has put out there, and one of his major points is that you have to tie any innovation back to jobs to be done, meaning like, what is the customer trying to accomplish? In this case, Parents are simply trying to make their lives easier, and the mechanism to do that is this AI engine that she's putting out there. So it's just such a great enabler, but it does absolutely start with what you said, which is parents are trying to make their lives easier. Whether or not it's technology that's going to let them do that is debatable. In this case, it seems to be.
Yeah.
With these big companies, because I guess I mentioned this earlier, but like when big companies want to move into this different type of model of recurring revenue and more subscription-based services kind of thing, when you're used to being like a long established enterprise. One way obviously is to just like acquire a company like this, but I think it's interesting too, to just touch on the kind of companies that want to get into this. Like, where would they start? What have we seen in our projects with those big companies when they want to get into it themselves without acquiring a company? Like, how do you even begin on that journey? What are the issues you face?
So, from my perspective, and by the way, I apologize for the noise in the background if you guys can hear it. There's construction going on outside the door here. But I think companies large companies who are established in a vertical or established in a segment, they make the mistake of ignoring smaller companies that are coming in, be it through tech play or be it through other mechanisms, because they ignore it because they think that they're never going to make it to my size. And there's a little bit of almost like they tend to be a little bit more trying to use a nice word here. They don't think anybody can beat them, so they get a little arrogant in the way they do things. And it's a perfect time for smaller players to come in through technology, through a better connection to the customers, things like that, customer intimacy, which gets lost as companies get larger. And those are great angles to come in. So I don't doubt, Tracy, to your question, if I was doing a startup, I would look at sort of, are there duopolies out there? Are there, are there industries where there's three major players that make up, 80-90% of the market share? Those are probably perfect places to go find your little niche and go in and go, hey, I'm different from these guys. I've got a tech play. I'm nimbler. I'm smaller. I care about you. And then, you do the customer intimacy and slowly start taking market share away. And these customers realize over time that, hey, this is going to be cheaper. It's going to be more efficient. It'll be better. They care about us. There's a better partnership. And it's not unheard of. And we've seen it. Adnan, you can probably speak to it better. We've seen it with some of our clients that situation's happened.
100%. Yeah, it's super interesting. Doing a bit of a deep dive into disruptive innovation, one of the things that we had found was there was some research done around companies that had been disrupted. And those companies, when surveyed, they went out there and asked, is this something that you just were not aware of in the market? Is this something that was ever under consideration? And the overwhelming response was that any company out there, the ones that failed to capitalize on these opportunities, they never said, this is something that we just never thought of. What they always said was, this is a solution that was on our radar, but we did not go down the path of putting this into the market. We had actively experimented with solutions like this, but we didn't put a business model in place or a sales strategy in place to really push this into the marketplace. And you start to think about, well, why could that be? And one of the things that we see, with some level of frequency is these disruptive solutions are an external threat to these businesses, but it's also an internal threat because they say, well, it's typically lower cost and it has some significant potential to cannibalize my existing offerings. So you have to be really, really careful there, because no company out there wants to go down the path of cannibalization, because it has the obvious implication of lowering their revenue and profit base. But if there is a better solution out there, then you have to be conscious of it. You have to assess it in the right way. And eventually that better solution, if it works better for the customer, is going to win out. So it really boils down to, is this more or less valuable to our customer, engaging it in the right way, and then building that innovation engine that is assessing disruptions in the right way. So it's really important to be able to assess these in the right way and not fear this this cannibalization that can occur because of that external threat can be that much worse for a company.
One quick add here is it's interesting to me that there is sort of a self-fulfilling prophecy that happens is these larger companies tend to be public, and public companies tend to be very short-term focused, where they're like, I got to hit my next quarter, I got to hit my next year targets, things like that. Otherwise, there's going to be backlash in the stock market, whatever it might be. So it provides an opportunity for a smaller company to think long-term, and consumers or customers to go, hey, this is more of a long-term play. And the larger companies are like, I just want this contract renewed. I just have to hit my quarterly numbers, my monthly numbers, So as you get bigger and you become public, you're focused so on the short term to hit these numbers that at times these companies, even if they're good and they're well-intended, they lose focus of that long-term customer need. Over time, what will it be? Where are the customers going? How will that demand change over time? You don't tend to ask those questions too much. You focus on that immediate need of hitting your numbers, and that
not to mention the inertia and politics of like hundreds of people around a legacy product that the whole career is tied to this thing. So
Pete, that's a great point. Adnan, the client that we were kind of alluding to a little bit earlier, one of the leaders actually said that there are people that may want to leave because of this dynamic that's happening with competitors and how big they're getting, the decisions they're making. There could be loss of talent, so that culture could be changing. And it's an opportunity for smaller players, if they're focused on the right problem set to solve for, that they could even accrue talent from the larger players, in order to innovate and grow faster and better, which is a scary thought, right?
Interesting. All right. Well, maybe we pause here. I feel like there's a bunch of other things. Maybe we do a part 2 and keep going on these kinds of things. And we'll stop there for now.
Sounds good.
Thank you.
Bye.